go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, yeah, thanks. My name's Scott Suhay. I'm an attorney. I'm a pilot. I'm a remote pilot also. I have a small law firm called Suhay and Suhay Attorneys at Law LLP. We do drone law and other unique certificates with the Code of Federal Regulations. I'm a former in-house counsel for a large aviation company, and I've done some work with the U.S. Department of Transportation. And it's a pleasure to be here.
So Brandon, would you mind just giving us a quick recap of what we talked about last time, just to catch everybody up who might not have joined into the last show?
Yeah, 100%. So the DoD was granted counter UAS authority through 10 USC 130I back in 2016. Immediately following the release of that legislation, the then Secretary of Defense said there is a process, there is a requirement. You do have to coordinate with the Federal Aviation Administration and take care of some other interagency coordination stuff to ensure safety of the NAS and this stuff. And so, however, you always have the right to self-defense. And so that kicked off a rather large conversation within the DoD on what does that mean. So base commanders are, because of the way the DoD ultimately frames the counter UAS discussion at the group 1 and 2, so small UAS 55 pounds and below, as a force protection issue, that responsibility of the installation security for that particular base for small UAS falls to the base commander and their security force element, their military police, for lack of a better word. So what that ultimately said was, going back to the self-defense piece, is that it gave the base commanders that ultimate authority and responsibility to protect their installation, and they could apply self-defense if the situation deemed necessary to the base commander. Now, I was on, so fast forward, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, something like that. I was on a call with the Department of Justice at a conference, and one of the things they stated and reiterated is, beyond the military, you do have a right to self-defense as an American citizen inside the United States. However, and this is something I'm looking forward to Scott diving deeper in from a legal side. There's a lot of nuances and different aspects to that, especially based on different state legislations and requirements and et cetera. So I'll talk really quick at a high level, the basic premise from a non-lawyer standpoint, from a purely operational standpoint, which is where I sit, on what that self-defense kind of doctrine really falls into. One, you have to have an imminent danger. That imminent danger has to be a person reasonably believes, that keyword reasonably, believes that they are about to be attacked, harmed, or someone near them is about to be attacked or harmed, et cetera. Now, the reasonability term, that's the test from the legal situation. You have to defend that reasonable understanding of what that threat was to a judge or jury or whomever that you're trying to say that you had that justification, the self-defense justification. So that's incredibly important. So that is really what it comes down to, is a threat assessment. Is it threat? Was it not? And how did you perceive that threat? And then you have to justify that to court. Reasonable force. You can't use a nuclear bomb to kill an ant. It has to be equal to the threat that you are experiencing. So, if someone's trying to punch you, you can't shoot them. There's you have to have reasonable force in that. For whatever means that you use for that self-defense. Provocation, which doesn't really apply to the drone issue. So I'm going to kind of actually just skip over that for the sake of time. And then the big one is collateral effects. So if somebody breaks into my house, I shoot them, that bullet, I miss or goes through them, and it goes across the street into my neighbor's house, and I hit somebody, that's on me. That's my responsibility. And so you are responsible for that use of force means if there is any, secondary, tertiary, whatever effects. You shoot at a drone, the bullet goes into a plane or a helicopter flying by, that's on you, the shooter, not you cannot defend away that piece of it. That's incredibly important. And that's why aviation safety is incredibly important. So please don't go shoot drone or guns in the sky. That's a terrible idea. So that's the basic premise. Again, imminent danger, reasonable belief that you're under threat, and know that whatever action you're applying, it has to be safe, contained. And the big question, and maybe Scott will dive into this, is if let's say you do take down a drone safely and that drone falls on a car or falls on, a baby seal, does that mean that's a collateral effect as well? So that'll be an interesting thing. So I'm really excited to hear from Scott and his perspective on the legal side. Scott, over to you, sir.
Cool. Yeah, thanks a lot, Brandon. So all these issues you're talking about are interesting because the answers to all the questions are all going to be the same answer. Case law. Case law answers everything. And where we are now is so cutting edge, the case law doesn't exist yet. That's why this is all so exciting. And it's going to get decided over the years when these things start to happen to civilians. And when I talk about case law, it makes me want to step way back in time, story time, to the classic self-defense case that every 1L law student learns in their first year of law school, which is called Catco v. Briney. Catco is a really famous case. And I want to go through the facts of the case. Even though it has nothing to do with drones, it has everything to do with self-defense and how different states handle it. So here's what happened in Catco. 1967, Mr. and Mrs. Briney had a farmhouse in Iowa. They inherited it. They were these two older people that inherited this old farmhouse from a relative out in the middle of nowhere. They didn't live in the house, and their problem was people kept breaking into the house and stealing stuff. It happens in a rural area, and they got really tired of this happening. Now, spoiler alert, nobody died in this story, but tragically, someone did lose a leg in the story. So here's what happened is Mr. and Mrs. Briney were sick of their house that they owned being burglarized. So they rigged up a shotgun with an automatic trigger where if someone opened a bedroom door, the shotgun had a string and the gun would go off. Now, you're probably thinking, that sounds like a really bad idea. Well, here's what happened in 1967. Another guy named Mr. Catco decided with his friend, hey, there's this old house that nobody lives in. And he had an antique collection. He said, let's go in the house and maybe get some antiques. So he broke into the house and stole some stuff. Now, he didn't know that this shotgun little system was in place. So unfortunately, Mr. Catco opened the bedroom door where the shotgun was, and he sustained really severe injuries from the shotgun discharging exactly the way they made it. He was in the hospital for several weeks. He ended up losing his leg. It was really unfortunate, but he survived. So what happened? He had a cause of action. He had a tort claim against Mr. and Mrs. Briney because just like you said, Brandon, you can't use a nuclear bomb to kill an ant. Is this reasonable? And this went before a jury. Now, when a jury has to decide something on a reasonableness standard, they're given jury instructions. And my brother deals with this all the time. The other Suhei, my brother, he's a criminal attorney. He deals with criminal law every day. And when a judge issues jury instructions, whether it's a criminal case like my brother or whether it's a tort case like Catco, what does reasonableness mean? It means you have to have a reason. Why did you set up the shotgun? And they couldn't prove that there was any reason that they should have set up this shotgun, Mr. and Mrs. Briney, because it's deadly force. And you can only use deadly force to defend against deadly force. Mr. Catco breaking into the house to steal some old mason jars, that doesn't need deadly force to be defended against. So that was a landmark case. It was kind of the first time this stuff really went before it was the Iowa Supreme Court, and now it's the basis for a lot of other case law around the U.S. What does it have to do with drones? It actually has a lot because it's the perfect case. One thing we talked about was the Castle Doctrine. The castle doctrine says your home is your castle. You can defend it if someone breaks into your house. In Catco, the Brineys didn't live in the house, so they couldn't apply the castle doctrine. Something else interesting about Catco is the shotgun was automatic. Let's say they did live in the house, and let's say someone was burglarizing it at night. Mr. Briney would have been justified in using a shotgun to maybe threaten the burglar and maybe to discharge it, but it depends on the facts of the case. In this case, it was automatic. Now, we're talking about drones. Fast forward to the present day, the 21st century. Me and Josh just had a really interesting experience at an industrial facility that produces polyethylene in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. And this place is a huge plant on a massive scale. Everything in it is extraordinarily fragile. If any of it's damaged, it could produce a major explosion. Someday, there are going to have to be systems in place to guard facilities like that against UAS nefarious operators. And the only way it's going to work is for that system to be totally automated. No human being can respond to a drone attacking an industrial facility on a human timescale. But just like Catco, an automatic system doesn't count as being reasonable enough to defend yourself in certain circumstances. So these things are all tied together. And I think you can see how we can play with the pieces and have an interesting discussion.
So thank you. That was it's really interesting. I think there's two big things. And I when I think about reasonable force, especially with drones, my brain immediately goes to prisons, because that's one of the biggest problems that we have right now, right in the United States, is contraband or along the border, drug smuggling, things like that. But prisons for me, and it's largely because of the story I'm about to tell you, which there was a smuggling run. The drones dropped a cell phone into the prison yard. That cell phone was used to coordinate an escape from 2 inmates. These inmates got out. They were able to get to a house. And they murdered the elderly couple that lived in that house due to this whole issue. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is really two questions. One, does a drone count as deadly force? I guess per exactly the law from an aircraft, I don't remember the number, 49 USC whatever, but 18 USC 32, Aircraft Sabotage Act and some of that. Does deadly force still count as the destruction of property? Is that equal, right? Because yes, the shotgun was rigged and did physical harm to another human, and maybe this gets to the iRobot kind of legality thing of like an industrial accident versus murder. Is the destruction of the drone the same? And then also, and we may not know that because it's never been litigated, right? But the other question is, if a drone is delivering contraband into a prison, right? And so the drone flies over, there's not necessarily an airspace restriction, but it is verified to be carrying a package. Could one reasonably make the determination that drone is a threat because it's carrying a package over the installation in the facility that it is, and then take action that may lean towards the justifiable side?
It's really interesting. And it brings up all these cool legal concepts. Like there's the doctrine of transferred intent. What is that? Did the person that flew the drone with the cell phone and drop it in the prison yard intend for those 2 elderly people to become murder victims? Well, sometimes under the doctrine of transferred intent, the answer is yes. And it depends on the facts of the case. There's also the concepts of a federal law fighting a state law. So, for example, what you're talking about is going to be the colliding of these two worlds, where you mentioned Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 32. And I'm going to read it. It says, whoever willfully sets fire to, damages, destroys, disables, or wrecks any aircraft in the special aircraft jurisdiction of the U.S. or any civil aircraft used operated or employed in interstate, overseas, or foreign air commerce, shall be fined under this title and imprisoned for not more than 20 years or both. A drone is an aircraft, a UAS. It has a registration number. It's a civil aircraft. But deadly force. Let's look at what the Pennsylvania, my state, I'm a Pennsylvania attorney. So in my state, our legislature has defined when force is justifiable. And I'm going to read it to you. It's section 505 of Title 18. In Pennsylvania, our law is use of force justifiable for protection of the person. The use of force upon or toward another person is justifiable when the actor believes that such force is immediately necessary for the purpose of protecting himself against the use of unlawful force by such other person on the present occasion. So that right there tells you, if I'm being attacked by a drone, if I know that this UAS is unlawful force by another person, then under Title 18, Section 505 of the Pennsylvania law, use of force is justifiable.
So real quick, because you hit on something that I think is important, is when you read the self-defense law from the state, it said reasonably believes, right?
Right.
But then when you came after it, after you said, I know that drone is attacking me, which you would never know unless it actually does it, right?
Right.
So if I am under the impression, because I don't know the intent of the operator, I am making, based on the totality of circumstances we like to use on the aviation side, I believe that drone is about to or could cause harm to not only myself, but possibly an inmate that's inside, that because they are about to release some kind of package from that drone. So I don't necessarily know what's in that package. It could be an explosive. One of the things we're seeing a lot in Ecuador right now is cartel. Well, I guess in Solanola is cartels using drones to do suicide runs on rival gang members and cartels. And so in Ecuador specifically, there was a gang or cartel leader in an Ecuadorian prison, and they blew up the prison roof twice trying to kill him. So what I'll bring this around. So let's say there is a gang member in the yard and someone got intel from the outside, and then they threw some syntax off of, or they're trying to kill him basically by dropping a payload from the drone. So you don't know unless it happens. So I guess the distinguishing thing that I'm trying to get to is that if you reasonably believe that drone is about to cause harm, you don't know. What you think is that in the justifiable reason or to give enough of a self-defense argument.
And guys, sorry not to cut into Scott. We actually had a caller want to jump on and ask some questions. They have actually some technology that has some automated, potential for automated drone mitigation and things like that. It's if Susan Roberts wants to jump in and to the conversation, so I'll bring her in and she can kind of introduce herself, and then we can jump right back in that question. All right, Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to just intro yourself real quick, and then we'll get back into the conversation?
Sure. I'm Susan Roberts. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Business Development for Honest Holdings. We own American Robotics, Aerobotics. One of the products we have is a counter drone that does shoot a net. The net has a parachute so that we can mitigate collateral damage. And we've used it successfully to counter drones in theater outside of the United States. So let me just say that I'm a firm believer that there will be reasons that we want to take a drone out of the sky. I'm a firm believer that we should be able to use a layered identification strategy to say that some of those drones are good drones and some of those drones are bad drones, right? So we have compliance rules, whether it be remote ID or, don't fly in no-fly zones, et cetera, et cetera. And as we loosen up regulations while also putting in place some protections for things like prisons, to your conversation, I guess what I'm hearing in the conversation is a very hard focus on the word eminent, right? And how that plays out in case law. But I'm also hearing that this is very new law, right? And I look at the police forces and I look at the prison operators as kind of an extension of public safety. And I say to myself, well, if I'm a prison operator and my job is to secure the prisoners inside, secure the community outside, and I know that contraband is not only dangerous, it's incredibly expensive, right? So you mentioned North Carolina. North Carolina had 430 drone incidences in 23-24, right? If you do the Department of Justice statistics, that could be $5,000 per incident. That's $2 million that it's costing the public just to have the drones fly over and smuggle something in, and that could be a cell phone, right? And to your point, that might not feel eminent, but it is eminently facilitating a crime and putting prisoners in a better position to smuggle drugs, coordinate escapes, et cetera, et cetera. So at what point does the law start crafting new law that says public safety has the right to defend, period?
Yeah, it's really.
I just want to throw out one super fast point. So, Suzanne, I think there's actually a testimony going on right now with some of my former colleagues, Mike Torfey, Steve Willoughby, and et cetera, advocating for exactly what you've been saying, but they've been advocating for this for years. And a really good friend of mine at Department of Justice as well, he just moved on to another position. The whole concept of some of this stuff being a misdemeanor and a lot of these other things is incredibly frustrating. The law is not written by lawyers or judges or anybody else. It's written by elected representatives who have a lot of political issues. So to me, from what I saw, especially on the federal side, there's a lot of politics getting in some of this. So anyway, I just want to throw that out. Scott, please.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And Susan, it's a fascinating scenario because it proves what's always been true. The leader always seems to be technology. Technology moves the fastest. It's first to do everything. Number two is the public, what they do. What is the public out there doing? What crimes are being committed? What prisons are being broken into or whatever? And then last is always the legislature and the law, and it's being dragged behind everything else. So how is this? It sucks that someday circumstances are going to force new laws to be written, but we're seeing it happen. We're living on that frontier. We already have a law in the state of Pennsylvania that says that if you try to deliver anything into a prison with a drone, it's a felony, and that's already on the books in Pennsylvania. But now going a step further and saying, what can an SCI a person that works in a prison do to make the drone go away? That's cutting edge. That's going to be really neat, and it's probably going to come from some of these states where it's the highest occurrence rates. It seems like the South American stuff is completely fascinating. This is happening. It's probably going to happen here. It's probably already happening, but I look forward to seeing how this can be managed, and hopefully it's done in a safe way.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, there's one case that I thought would be really interesting to look at that kind of brings what Susan and Scott and you, Brandon, were talking about. It was about the imminent threat, but maybe in a place that is a little bit different. When we were looking in Texas with the floods, we had that helicopter that was struck by a drone that was in a right? They had the no-fly zone. They weren't supposed to be there, and they literally could have killed a few people in that helicopter. In a situation like that, would there be a case that if there's a drone flying in a no-fly zone where clearly this is like a disaster area, you shouldn't be flying at all, and they could be causing danger to the pilots or the safety folks in the air, could there be a case for mitigating any drone in that space, or if there's a helicopter within a certain distance, or if there's operations within a certain distance, could there be a case for mitigating that, since it does cause that present danger to the flight crews and the helicopter?
So I want to, if I could just,
go ahead.
Just adjust your question just a little bit, because there's nuances within different types of airspace restrictions that is very critically important. Most TFRs in some way, shape, or form are for safety reasons. So you don't necessarily know that UAS is a threat, danger, whatever at that time. However, over prisons, especially federal prisons, all of them have what's called a 14 CFR 99.7 SSI, which is a national security airspace restriction. That flat out means if you do not have permission in there, emergency or not, you can be shot down inside of that. And it even says in all of those NOTAMs that you can get mitigation action based on et cetera laws. So to tailor your question a little bit differently, what I want to do, and I've tried to advocate for this in the past, the simple fact that a drone is flying inside of a 99.7 without permission, period, dot, inside of that airspace restriction, to me, is an imminent danger justification for the mere fact that it's violating national security airspace restriction. And so one of the things we were trying to do as well while I was a Fed was sponsor from the Department of Justice over to state prisons and county prisons, because some of these prisons now are housing international TCO, transnational criminal organization, cartel members who have a national security interest. So therefore, they should get a national security TFR. So I guess my question back to Scott then is, can imminent danger automatically be applied if it is violating a national security airspace restriction where there are criminal penalties? You can get shot down in those. Same thing with a 91-141, which is a presidential TFR. You violate that, guess what? You can get shot down inside the United States. Prohibited airspace is the same. So anyways, curious your thoughts on that.
My answer, well, I'll give the answer that every lawyer gives to every question. It depends. But it's certainly possible because, TFRs are evolving. And you bring up NOTAMs and TFRs. It's interesting. In Pennsylvania, I'm from Western Pennsylvania. We just had the U.S. Open. And the U.S. Open here in 2025 was a big year because there was a TFR and it wasn't over an airport and it wasn't over a stadium. And that doesn't sound like much. You think, well, duh, of course the U.S. Open should get a TFR. But it was actually really tough for that to happen. And it happened because the drone interdiction technology and requirements are evolving. And the people that made the TFR were able to convince the people that issue TFRs to issue it, even though it's kind of a case where in the past they wouldn't have issued a week-long TFR for a golfing event. They did this time. That's an example of this stuff evolving. Now, all this stuff with prisons is cool because it speaks to law enforcement. What is law enforcement able to do? The person that's guarding a prison is ultimately law enforcement. And that's a totally different thing than what civilians are allowed to do. Someday, these things are going to be affecting, John Doe on the street in his yard. Can he shoot at a drone with a shotgun? It's actually a huge trend right now. You talk about trends in prisons and stuff. There's another trend in the country where more and more people are taking firearms to drones in their yard because more people are flying them. And that opens up a whole different body of law where you get into, first of all, is it an imminent threat? And if it is, what kind of state do you live in? Do you live in a stand your ground state or do you live in a duty to retreat state? What's the difference? A duty to retreat state is if something bad is happening out in public, you have to run away. You have to run home where it's safe. A stand your ground state has different law where if something threatening is happening and you're out in public, you don't have to run home and hide. You're allowed to use force that's equal to the force that's threatening you. And you got to know which state you live in. Stand your ground states are a lot more common than duty to retreat states. But I'm talking about civilians. The law enforcement discussion is totally different.
So Scott, real quick on that. And then I have one more question after you answer this one. So taking down an aircraft is a federal offense through two federal offenses, right?
It's a felony, yeah.
So does it even matter what the state law is, whether it's standing ground, duty retreat, because you're not going to be prosecuted in state court at that point. You'd be prosecuted in federal court.
Yeah, that's correct. It'd be a federal case. And you'd go before a U.S. attorney. Well, you'd go before a federal court and the U.S. attorney would get involved. And the issues of state law and federal law are a fascinating dynamic and how they interact and what it means for our country. But it's going to depend on the circumstances of which laws you're going to be using. You know, for example, when we talk about drones as aircraft, all drones are aircraft. And you kind of have to put the drone piece in the back of your mind and think you got to treat it just like it's a 737. And when you read Title 18, Section 32, and I'm going to look at it again because I thought of this when Susan was talking about the net system. What the law says is damages, destroys, disables, wrecks, or sets fire to. So does a net count? Nobody thought of that when they wrote that federal law because they were
Can't
thinking
catch a 737 with a net. What are you talking about?
So, and Susan, I'll ask you, how much damage is done to a UAS when this net system's used? Is it usable again?
Well, it's going to depend, right? If I shoot it against a very, very small drone and I capture that completely in the net and safely bring it to the ground with a parachute, maybe not a lot of damage. Maybe we, spiffy it back up and send it on its way. If I take down a larger drone where I've disabled the propellers or I've disabled something on the way down and it's heavier than my net or parachute can handle, then there's going to be damage, right? So I guess the question is, we need to be in a position to figure out how the law works without forcing some poor prison guard to make front page news because he's now on trial in federal court for taking an action that he thought was reasonable, that his prison thought was reasonable, et cetera, et cetera. And I wonder if it becomes prosecutorial discretion, right? If the administration simply says, if you are a prison guard or an operator of a prison and a drone is flying into your space and it has a TFR and you've done everything right and you've got this layered ID, we're not going to prosecute you if you choose to use a counter UAS system. Like, my company doesn't want to make front page news and be the person who gets to go on trial and see that, right? What we're looking for is an appreciation that there are scary people out there. There are scary people doing scary things out there. Some of them are using drones. And the police forces and the prison guards need to be equally able to use technology for good.
It's chicken and the egg. And so who's going to break the deadlock? Who's going to move first? And God forbid it, we have to decide based on case law. One of the leaders in this field, though, is the FAA safety team, the FAST team. And I'm sure, Brandon, you're familiar with what the FAST team is. The FAST team is part of the FAA's public outreach. And their job is to communicate what regulations mean to members of the public. And I'm good friends with some of these people. And they've talked about an interesting trend, Susan, that addresses your question. Years ago, the FAST team from these FSDOs would speak to U.S. attorneys and assistant U.S. attorneys about drones. I know this because these FAST team people are my friends, and we talk about law, and they say, yeah, back then the U.S. attorney, they didn't give us the time of day. FAA stuff, we don't care. We're out to get the bad guys. But that's changing. Nowadays, there are people from the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Pennsylvania that are, communicating. Communication is all that really it comes down to. And they're now interested in, okay, well, what are the trends? And what is the data? And what are these cases? And what can we do? So the attitude is shifting. And that's a good thing because as long as people are communicating, a U.S. attorney talking to the FAA, that's kind of a cool bridge. And that's what, that's like podcasts like this is building these bridges. And, wouldn't it be interesting to get some people that work at SCIs or other prisons to talk through this and see what their experience. Josh, do you know anybody at any prisons that are clamoring for systems that can detect UASs?
All of them.
Yeah,
every one of them, probably.
Even energy. It's not just prisons, but power plants, chemical factories. I mean, everybody. I think the challenge is, and this is something we've seen quite a bit, is that you like we're saying the chicken before the egg. But for a lot of these folks, let's say you're a multi-billion-dollar oil company and you're have all of these sensitive sites. You may have thousands of sensitive sites across the country that you may want to protect. But then, how are you going to justify to your board that you should spend, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars to protect them if all you can do is say, hey, look at the drone as it flies and hits your facility. So
yeah, okay.
So Brandon will also deep inside.
Yeah, well, I've been my position in the FAA was to coordinate all federal counter UAS missions operationally throughout the country, all of it. If you were the DOE, DOD, DOJ, DHS, it had to be coordinated with the FAA, and that's what my office did. So my entire staff did all of that. So we saw everything. We saw all ConOps, we saw all technology, we saw literally everything. That was coordinated within the process. We own that process. And so I was chopped to the NSC for 3 years as the senior rep for the air traffic and did all that. So I saw all that development. One of the things that really frustrates me is the fact that a lot of folks think, well, I can see a drone, but I can't do anything. And that's, I can't even I'm losing my words because that's just wrong. There's so much that has to be done. That's like saying, well, there's an active shooter, but I can't do anything about it because I can't shoot him or something. So I'm just going to let him go. You have to do training. A lot of your folks need to know, what do I do if I see a drone? How do I report that? Do I stay in my car? Do I go here? Who do I call? Does law enforcement officers know what to do? Most of them don't. They don't know the laws in this, and this is not a hit on them. It's just they haven't been trained. Training and information, and just what Scott was saying, the communication is finally happening to educate and get information to folks so that they can understand that detection is a very important thing. Knowing that it's there, being able to move around resources, people. What if you have a dangerous operation that occurs outside? Nuclear power plants have offloading of nuclear waste. And so a lot of them that I've spoken through, well, we can take a 737 to the face and we're fine. I'm like, well, what happens if a drone flies over and you're doing an offloading procedure of nuclear waste? Oh, well, we didn't think of that. I said, yeah, there's a lot of operational consequences to the normal day-to-day activities of your facility that are important to know. And that's why detection is also important. So that's also why I wanted to bring up the self-defense justification. So there's two other things I just want to throw out there real fast. So while 18 U.S.C. 32 may not apply for Suzanne, one of the big problems you'll run into on the net capture is 49 U.S.C. 46502, which is aircraft piracy, which essentially states, hey, you can't affect an aircraft by seizing control over it. So that'll be kind of a limiting factor. And this is another thing that we run into a lot is, well, what can I do from the other side, right? Like, so say there's an organization that has data centers and they're concerned about that. Well, what can I do? And that's why we try to say you have to look at your security policy. You have to modernize these things. You can do something. If that drone is starting to dive bomb people and all that, hell yeah, shoot it down. Don't let it just do that because you think you can't do anything. That's crazy. So I have 6 months of emergency food stocked in a closet somewhere. It's good for 20 years. My wife, when she met me, it's still good, by the way, is why do you have that? Are you some prepper? And I said, no. But what if we are in a flood? Look at Texas. What if we can't get access to these things? We live on the coast now. I would rather have something and not need it than need it and not have it. And that's where I think companies like Ondis and Dedrone, Drone Shield are incredibly valuable. And we need to get their technology out there because when it happens, because it will, you do not want to be ill prepared. You don't want to be unprepared, not prepared, whatever the case may be. Have it. You're going to use it at some point. The only last thing I wanted to hit on, and I know I'm monopolizing the microphone here, is NNSCs. We have the World Cup coming up. Copa Games just ended. World Cup's coming, LA Olympics. There's a thing called National Security Special Events. There's a working group made up of interagency. It's called the CWIG, which is the Counter UAS Working Group. within the NNSEs is essentially a state's request to the federal government saying, hey, can we get support for security for this event? It's a national event, World Series, the Super Bowl, the US Open, like you just said, major golfing tournaments. These are nationally recognized things. So if a terrorist really wanted to do some bad, that's where they're going to hit. But look at the Boston Marathon, right? So my point is a lot of these NSCs do not qualify, but they do get rated 1 through 4, SEER level ratings. And so if you get a SEER level 1, you're supposed to get a 14 CFR 99.7, a security TFR. That means you do have extra authorities within there to take certain actions if there's deemed a threat. So again, this is where ONDIS and some of these other things can be on kind of standby. Like if a bomb goes off, guess what, drones, you're out of here. And if you're here, we're going to do something because you are now in an imminent danger situation and we need to cleanse the situation fast. And going back to Suzanne's part about the DOJ exercises its authority at the will of the president of the administration. And so if they say, yeah, you know, you shot a drone down and it kind of, but you know what? We get it. We're not going to investigate. We're not going to press charges. There is a discretion there, and that's to the authority of the Department of Justice and whatever they want to do. I will tell you from inside the government that has happened. It has it's not publicly, you know, but it has happened. And so there are situations that are deemed so necessary. You know, the situation is the situation, and they decide not to press charges. It's the same with any state prosecutors. They can decide to press charges if they feel that they have a case that's worth charging. And so most of these folks are political as well. So they have a political, you know, responsibility to their representatives. Most AGs are elected. And so this is so complicated and so nuanced. There's no real black and white in any of this, especially because there's not a lot of case law behind it. And that's why I was super excited to hear from Scott and reading that law. If I wasn't 41 years old, I would immediately go back to law school because I think it's amazing. But trying to push my daughter now, so I'll live through her. Anyways, I'm sorry I went on a rant, but there's just so much around this. Anyways, I'll be quiet now.
I guess it kind of goes back to the, you know, Scott, you know, with, you know, the idea of self-defense. In order to prove that, you really do, like Susan said and Brandon said, you need to have that layered detection piece. So that way you can prove that there was a drone there and it shouldn't have been there. For sure, there was a drone. You said exactly where it was. It's not where it's supposed to be. And potentially that it's, even if it's not currently dive bombing somebody, it's within the range to where it could become, you know, an imminent threat to people. Are those sort of things helpful? Or if you were mounting a case of self-defense, what pieces of, or what would be ways to bolster that to, you know, get the best chance of winning that case? You know, if I was on the side, you were a prison or you were, yeah,
if I was defending the actor, I'd say the actor believed that such force was immediately necessary. And if I was on the prosecution, I would say you willfully wrecked an aircraft. And if I was on the jury, well, I don't know what I would decide. So it's certainly worth a shot for people who are someday going to face this. I don't mean that as legal advice. I mean it as a discussion point. As how do you justify it? How do you say it's immediately threatening? Well, we have technology now that, okay, the thing is not broadcasting a signal. The thing is using a fiber optic tether, so it can't be tracked. It's not made by a recognized manufacturer. Okay, these things are really, really indicative that it's a threat. You would absolutely use those arguments. How are juries and judges going to come down? It's going to depend on how relatable the facts of the case are to the rest of the world, you know. And we go back to CATCO. And why is CATCO taught in law schools? Because everybody can understand the elements at play there: abandoned farmhouse and the guy breaking in just for some, you know, not really threatening stuff. And it's the same with whatever these cases are going to be. where someone is going to be clearly justified in doing what they do. And we don't know who that's going to be, whether it's going to, what side it's going to be on. So I agree with Brandon that training and education is a huge part of this. Like he said about, oh, you're not powerless. It's not like there's nothing you can do. One of the trends in our region, in Western Pennsylvania, I know a lot of police officers, and I was having a discussion with a retired police officer about drones, and lawyer, police officer talking, retired guy, and he said, well, there's nothing we can do from the law enforcement side because it's not a vehicle. We can't pull it over, because this guy in his head was thinking license plates, highways, driving. And no, you can write a person a citation, disorderly conduct. You don't need to have a vehicle to write a person a citation for disorderly conduct. And in the state of Pennsylvania, we have laws that make operating a drone the same as disorderly conduct if you don't follow FAA regulations and if you put someone in a reasonable fear of bodily injury. So a police officer absolutely can write a ticket for certain circumstances involving drones. And that message is getting out. And it's becoming obvious to different people that they have to put more emphasis. And as people, it's a generational thing too. As a new generation of law enforcement enters the world, they're going to put more emphasis on this as well. So stay tuned, because this is going to be super interesting from here on out.
And I want to throw one. I don't want to call it a pitch, but it really sort of is. But it's to the technology that Ondas and some of these other, they call them LCEIs, or low collateral effects interceptors. And especially in the prison and domestic situation, I think the border is incredibly important as well, because it's carrying hazardous substance, fentanyl, and all these other things. You don't want that in the air. You don't want that exploding on the ground. You want to control it. So if you're a prison, and if this is something that you are looking to do, I would highly consider one of these systems that does the net capture event, because you can control the situation. You can control where the drone goes. You can control the package. And not only you can do post forensics on that drone, and let's say it's a DJI or an Autel or some of these other, you can actually subpoena the company based on that serial number and find out where that drone was purchased or came from. Now, that may not necessarily lead to the actual operator who was flying it. However, that does give you a trail, and it allows you to open a case for somebody who is trying to smuggle contraband into a prison. And to me, that is the more severe law violations that you would want to be investigating, rather than a drone that was trying to smuggle in and you took it out.
So if we walked away a little bit from the stand your ground law, and you said I was using my use of force training, right, and whatever protocol that police department or prison has for use of force, and I was actually retaining evidence. Right, as you just said, I captured the drone in a net. Now I have it. I have the serial number. Perhaps I actually followed the drone back to the car where the pilot was trying to package the drone back into the car. And I have a video of that now that could be helpful for prosecution. At a certain point, is stand your ground maybe not the right approach, and we need to start walking into the justified use of force, or justified probable cause for detainment or capture of evidence. And do we need to start thinking about how somebody secures the drone in that way? And that's the path forward. Like, we didn't mean to hurt the drone. We actually meant to capture it in a net and bring it safely down to the ground. Still, I know we're interfering with an aircraft.
Oh yeah, that's a different world. Stand your ground versus castle doctrine and duty to retreat is all about civilians. When you talk about law enforcement personnel, this is analogous to a police officer shooting out the tires of a car that's charging a crowd. Are they justified in doing that? Absolutely. Are they justified in using a maneuver where they hit the bumper of the car they're chasing? Absolutely. And that kind of law is maybe that's going to be the first place where this is really going to get tested. And it's cool for me, because as a civilian attorney, I don't think that way. I think about, tort law. and who's going to sue who. So when you talk about, well, this is let's talk about prison guard. It's like, oh, this is really cool. What is a, is a prison guard, is a person standing in a guard shack at a prison allowed to do the same things that a Pennsylvania state trooper is allowed to do on the highway in a high-speed chase? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. So you're giving me some homework. I like it.
Wait, Scott, is there a potential that, let's say, the Pennsylvania state trooper could do that, with justified use of force? Could they potentially deputize maybe the prison guard or even a utility? Let's say, there's a large chemical plant that, would be a national security threat, but there's obviously a lot of red tape goes around trying to give them the ability to mitigate. Could they be then deputized by law enforcement to say, in this specific case, you guys could, act as, a policeman and using, justified use of force?
It's interesting. I'd have to think of the most relevant example. And the one that comes to mind is a glider that got too close to a nuclear power plant. I think it was in the state of Pennsylvania. I forget, it was in 2012 or 2013. And boy, did that set off alarm bells. It was a total accident by the glider pilot. But in what cases can the Pennsylvania State Police deputize other people in terms of drones? That's fascinating. I don't know. I don't know how it would be done. My county, Fayette County, I live in Fayette County, and we just built a new jail. And now I want to go do my homework and go look at the jail and see if they installed a drone detection system on the side of the building. It's brand new. They probably did. I know the guy that is in charge of the building, so I'll have to have that conversation with him.
Well, and here's one interesting thing too, is that the let's say it's a contract prison with contract security, they don't necessarily have to be the ones to push the button that's ultimately responsible for the action. So a law enforcement, an actual sheriff's deputy could be the person that initiates the action, which did the thing, which provides them that a little bit of, extra legal authority or whatever the case may be to exercise that action. It doesn't need to be the contractual security folks to do it.
Absolutely. Actually, targeting the drone could be in a fusion center or your state police or your city police. There's a number of ways we can do that without it being the prison guard. The prison guard would simply push a button or something that says, I think this is a problem. Pay attention. All right. Yeah. Not that wouldn't be actively monitored somewhere else.
Well, maybe I can tell a story that it doesn't really have to do with drones, but it might be funny. Can I tell a funny story?
Yeah, yes. Go ahead.
So in my other life, I fly in air shows. I'm an air show pilot, and we fly this antique airplane where we drop candy from the airplane. That's what we do. It's called the Candy Bomber, and we drop candy. And we did an air show at Waynesburg Airport in Greene County, Pennsylvania. And on immediately north of the runway is SCI Greene. It's a Supermax prison. And they told us, when you drop the candy, we have to follow the FAA waiver and 500-foot crowd line and everything. No matter what you do, don't fly over the prison because of what you said, Brandon, about the laws in place that say you can't do that. So we take off. And to drop this candy, you got to get the wind right. You got to get your ground speed right. And we're watching the crowd, and it's an old airplane, and it's loud. And the time came, and we dropped the candy, and the candy's flying out of the airplane. And I was dumping it out. I wasn't in the cockpit. I was back that flight. And I dropped the candy. And sure enough, I looked down out the emergency exit, and we are right over SCI Greene. So sorry, we broke that rule. Nobody ever said anything, but yep, that was out the window.
Well, we have our first case to prosecute. Thank you, Scott. We'll be giving you a call.
I'll let you know how many years.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good conversation, and maybe we can do another panel sometime and bring some prison folks on, and maybe get in more. If you have some folks at the prison that you're at who maybe would want to jump on that new prison in Fayetteville, we'd always be happy to have them on the show too. And I do think that Brandon and a lot of our other panelists have always made great comments on use what's there right now. Don't hope for some future change. Like there's already stuff right in front of you that you can actually take hold of and use. And I think some of these justified use of force, potentially, self-defense, deputizing, or, having the police do something remotely that, can then protect a prison or another critical site. I think there are already existing things that can be done. It's just a matter of educating the right people and working together to solve this. Because at the end of the day, this is probably one of the most significant risks to our civil society is people abusing drones, as you can see over the world. I mean, there's all sorts of mischief being. I mean, saw like last week, the cartels in Mexico or like Brandon said, or in South America are using drones actively to to assassinate folks, and it's only so much time before that comes over here. So yeah, I think these are really vital conversations to happen now to get ahead of it before we're having to play catch up after a tragic event.
Yeah, don't wait. And if you have questions, we're available. Reach out to us, and we're happy to help and guide and do what we can.
Awesome.
Definitely. Well, everybody, thank you for joining in, and we'll be back next week on Tuesday. And make sure to tune in Thursday to get David's show, where we'll be going over some great topics there as well. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you can